Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming this evening. My name is Dr Katy Shaw. I'm Principal Lecturer in English at Leeds Beckett University. I'll be your host for this evening. We're very lucky to have this evening Sunjeev Sahota, who I will be in conversation with in a moment. This event is the third event in our Rewriting Yorkshire seminar series, which is hosted by the English and Creative Writing team in the School of Humanities at Leeds Beckett University. The remit of the series is really to critically examine the way in which Yorkshire, our county, is being represented by writers, creatives and artists in the 21st century, and to think about how we can join in debate and dialogue about those representations. Tonight we are very lucky to have Sunjeev. Sunjeev has had an amazing 2015 that we're going to talk about. Yeah, very amazing 2015. I last spoke to you in March, I think, just the week before the book was about to come out, where we did Leeds Bookend Festival, big Bookend Festival. And since then, The Year of the Runaways second novel has gone stratospheric, and you've probably seen references to numerous awards and critical accolades. Sunjeev's career began with his first novel, Ours Are the Streets, which was placed on the Granta 2013 Best of Young British Novelists list. I was lucky enough again to go out on tour with Sunjeev to Bangkok and tour the Granta list around the world. Ours Are the Streets is a very brave and ambitious novel. It tells the story of the radicalisation of a young boy in Sheffield and his kind of coming-of-age narrative. The Year of the Runaways is Sunjeev's second novel. It again tells another brave story about immigration, very timely in 2015, and considers the life path of three Indian men who move to Sheffield and share a house, and considers really timely ideas about belonging and identity. Could you please join me in welcoming Sunjeev Sahota? So, Sunjeev, here we are again in Leeds.
Yeah, great to be here.
Now, a lot has happened since March when we last spoke. Some things that we couldn't have predicted or expected. All of them good, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can we take it back a little bit further to start with, maybe to your beginnings as a writer? Because one fact that seems to crop up about you as given fact in interviews is this claim that you didn't read a novel until you were 18. Yeah. Is that true?
It is true, it is. You're right, it does get mentioned all the time. It's become a bit of an albatross around my neck, because I think it sort of defines me in a way, or people think it defines me in a way that I'm not sure how comfortable I feel about. But I mean, the bare facts of it are true. For some reason at school, so I only studied English up until I was 16, and then I did sciences for A-levels, and then I did a degree in maths. So we missed the novel out when I was doing my GCSEs. I think the other sets did. I remember one of my, someone in the adjoining set doing Hard Times, but for us, we did poetry, plays, memoir, anthology, which I think contained extracts, but not an actual full novel. So yeah, it was only when I was 18, the summer before university, at the airport, and decided I wanted something to read on a plane, and picked up Midnight's Children.
Not your average airport novel.
I think maybe I noticed, I'm sure, because I was going to India, I wanted to read a novel that was somewhere connected to that place. Maybe I noticed it was published in the year I was born, and I'm sure I was probably aware of Salman Rushdie and his sort of his renown. So yeah, and then from then it was I remember finishing that book, or starting it on the plane and finishing it soon on landing in India. And it's not I can't really claim to say I understood that book on the first reading. I reread it several years later, and I think understood it a bit more. But there was definitely something about storytelling that sort of spoke to me in quite a deep level. Looking back now, it's made me think things don't seem like turning points at the time. It's only when I look back and try to sort of rationalise that I can see it as a turning point. And from then I caught the bus. I was in India in a state called Punjab in the northwest corner, in a sort of a very rural part of that state with my family there, and I caught the bus to the nearest city, found a bookshop who only stocked novels by Indian authors, only stocked books by Indian authors, and so that after Midnight's Children it was, what was it? It was Suitable Boy, then The God of Small Things, and then A Fine Balance. And then I got to England and read my first book by a white author or a non-Indian author, which is The Remains of the Day. So those were my, and then after that I've got no idea. After that, it was just one after the other quite quickly, I think.
That's quite an ambitious introduction to the novels and classics.
They're not bad
off
5 books to start with, I guess. But after that, it was novels all the way. And I remember throughout university, I was reading 2-3 books a week. It was a sense of just like, this is something, this is something, worth living for, really.
And did that feel very separate to your life as a maths student?
Yeah, that took a bit of a back, which probably explains my degree. But that took a bit of a back burner. So yeah, I think it did. It felt like something quite private, something that was for me, something that was helping me make sense of my childhood, of my adolescence, and just sort of I think it was definitely beneficial and something I kept to myself, as I kept writing to myself as well until my first book was published. It was very much something I almost kept hidden or secret, and I just did it in the weekends and evenings, just sort of hidden away in my room, not really letting anyone see it or sort of be aware that this was something that meant a great deal to me.
And that point at which you decided to pick a pen, go on the keypad and make the transition from being a reader to a writer, in hindsight, what was that tipping point, that pivot point that made you decide, I'm not just going to consume this, I'm actually going to try and create this as well?
Yeah, lots of things happened. So I think very quickly when I started becoming a deep and heavy reader, as I call reading lots of things, as you start to read so many books, and there became a point when I started wondering, and not all readers have this, but it happened with me, started wondering, why did the writer make this choice? How does this book work? I just wanted to pull the book apart and see its cogs and see its mechanics and try to put it back together again. And I started reading with a much more of an analytical eye. And I think once I got to that point, it wasn't a big leap to want to write my own novel and have a go at doing it myself. And then it's a case of just thinking about a subject that was meaty enough to sustain the length of a novel, and in how ideas come about, it's quite an abstract thing. There's a kernel there, and it so it just sort of seems to accumulate mass until fingers touch keyboards and words appear. But I was in Leeds when I was in 2005 during the London bombings, and there was something about that event which gave me a lot of pause for thought, actually, and that made me want to actually think, here's a psychology which would be interesting to explore through the medium of a novel. And one of the things that the novel is great at is trying to get inside the head, or just foster some sort of feeling with people that you might not otherwise think you'd be able to.
And because that period, obviously, particularly in Leeds, thinking about a sense of place and how informative that is for the writing process, was a time of trauma, was kind of a time of coming to terms with this idea that terrorism was born here.
There was lots of questioning going on, and I remember in Beeston felt like quite a closed, quiet place that was really just trying to look at itself, and there was people coming from all over the country to sort of almost to a extent pointing the finger, to an extent just sort of demanding answers from various people. And it's like it was a difficult time, and for me it was just trying to hone in on this idea of what would make a young man who in many respects was just like me, a young man, the son of immigrants, brought up in the north of England, what would make someone like that go down a path that's so different to my own. And I think Ours Are the Streets is a sort of it's a character study. I think it sort of shows the psychology of someone who it could actually be anyone, but just a certain set of circumstances in a particular point in time in history takes him down a path, and that felt like quite a true way to show his story.
And it's a very intimate representation, because obviously it's kind of framed as a confessional narrative for those of you who haven't read it, and has this closeness and that creates a degree of empathy with the challenges that the narrator is facing. To what extent was that kind of the project of the book in terms of opening up that debate and making us look again at the individuals involved?
Yeah, that took a while for me to come up with the structure of the book, or the framework for the book, and it was a lot of... The book grew quite organically, so I started off writing it in the third person. It wasn't working, tried the first person, but then to write in the first person when you've got a character who may or may not still be there at the end of the book, it presents its own challenges. You can't write a traditional first person past, first person present. So there was various toing and froing until I came up, well, I decided to write it to present the novel as his written account, as his diary or journal or his sort of late night scribbles. And you're absolutely right. So the whole what that allowed me to do was to actually just sort of unpack him, and to sort of keep my gaze on him and his inner life as closely and with as much power as I could. And the confessional format is made for that, really.
And in terms of form, obviously moving between Hours of the Streets and The Year of the Runaways, there came the Granta list,
Yeah.
which obviously had a huge effect in terms of getting your writing out there and getting it publicised. What was the effect particularly on Hours of the Streets with the kind of the Granta push that came in 2013, being named on that list?
Yeah, it gave it an international profile, which is, and it's wonderful. I'd say the big point of, or one of the biggest things about writing, well, I don't think a book is written until there's a reader. So I think writing is half the thing, and then the reader comes on board. And I think I said this earlier, the book almost becomes a bridge between two people, the writer and the reader. So the fact that the Granta list was just creating lots of bridges, I'd say, between me and loads of readers. But it enabled me to start working, so I could write full time, and which enabled, it's given me writing as a career, really. So it's been completely transformative.
And what was the kind of the most significant thing you learned as a process of that year? Because the year itself must have been quite a whirlwind, from being included in the list and then the tour beginning and the international element of it. Did it teach you one thing in particular?
I think it probably taught me to always make time for writing, not let everything else overpower or overwhelm me, and to remember that the play's a thing, the book is it, and everything else has to sort of take, as wonderful as it is and as seductive as it is to be flown to places and doing great events with you and meeting all these writers, and also actually to feel part of the writing community. I think I felt quite outside, and I think there was I felt with my first book a bit of imposter syndrome, that I don't quite belong in this sort of literary community. But the Granta sort of imprimatur just sort of says absolutely no, you are a writer. You absolutely belong in this writing world. And so though I do still keep myself out of it, it's good to know that there's these judges who I deeply admire, who sort of say you're doing okay. And I think that's what I take from Granta. It's a sense that you're doing okay, and keep going, and you might be okay. You might be all right.
I think in terms of discipline, one thing that I always remember from our Bangkok trip is being in the midst of Bangkok and all the wonderful distractions and amazing things you could go off and do.
Jet lag at 3 in the morning.
Yes, jet lag at 3 in the morning. Yeah, there was that as well. You were writing this.
I was
writing while the rest of us were going, yay, Bangkok. You were going back to your room and you were writing.
I was doing the early drafts of this. I remember that, just because it was impossible to sleep, because I think there was lots of people at 2, 3, 4 in the morning down in the lobby on their laptops working, and you're absolutely right. So I think discipline is something I've sort of had from the start because of writing because I started while working full time, so just having to sort of impose the structure on the day, and that feels quite natural to me now, to actually just to have, you know, allotted hours to do stuff.
So talk me through your writing day. Is there a structure?
When I was, I'm not writing at the moment because this book came out in June, and there's been lots happening. The actual writing hasn't happened yet, but I think it will start again in the new year. But when I was writing this, I write from 10 till about 2-3 o'clock, which is bookended by sort of nursery drop-offs, nursery pickups, and various kidsy family stuff. And I try to do that definitely 4 days a week, and usually 5 days a week. And that's it. I can't really do more than 4 or 5 hours of writing, because then it just becomes gibberish, and it's just stuff I know I'll end up deleting the next day. And I delete enough of what I write in those 4 hours anyway, rather than giving them, making it too easy for myself to delete things. So that's it. It's quite simple. It's 10 till 2, 10 till 3, and I try to do about 800. If I get to 800, that's a good day.
So you do have an actual numeric target?
I do. I'd like, because I maybe it's the maths side. I just think if I do that a day, then in a year I'll have a draft that I can work on for the next year. So I do think there's where I like to know that there's sort of progress being made. I suppose if there's a bar, I like to see that bar being sort of slowly coloured in.
Quantity emerging. Yeah. And so obviously the Year of the Runaways was emergent in your kind of creative consciousness while all this stuff was going on around Granta. How did the novel then develop from that point of giving up the job, having that authenticity of the Granta thing, to publication?
As I was on the streets, that was quite an organic process, and there was a lot of stopping and starting as I continually got the structure wrong. And it took about a year before I decided to write it in that sort of that confessional mode. And I thought, well, I don't want to get so many things wrong at the outset. And I think structure for me is really important to get right as much as I can before I put pen to paper, because otherwise it's one thing that I can't correct halfway through the book. I would just have to start again. So I spent a lot of time planning this book. I thought I wanted to go through its writing in a slightly more dignified fashion than I did I was on the streets. So it was about 6 months of planning, and also because it's a bigger book in terms of its cast, and it's canvas. It takes place over a few continents. There's more stories to try to intertwine and bring to the fore, and more characters. So it's more of an ensemble piece. So it just needed more planning. So I spent a good 6 months or so planning it, and then started, and the first sentence hasn't changed pretty much, and that was it. I didn't have to start again at any point. There was a wobble at around 30,000 doldrums, which I think most writers get, and then it was quite reasonably smooth sailing to get to a first draft, and then there were various drafts and edits, and it took about 4 years. I finished it in August 2014. That was last year, wasn't it? Yeah, August 2014. And then there was 7 or 8 months of editing with Medita, and then it was published in June.
And is that maybe the key difference between Owls of the Streets and the second novel, that you were effectively in isolation when you were having those terrible kind of wrestling with structure and with voice, whereas this time were you more open to going to the editor and saying, I want to bounce this off you? Or
I didn't actually. I just like to work things out on my own, so I didn't do any bouncing or much discussion about what the form will be. I had an idea in my mind what I sort of, because I think the first book is sort of about in some key respects about my adolescence and my own growing up. I say it's a book about someone becoming a man and trying to deal with their thoughts about their upbringing or their childhood. And as first novels are, it's autobiographical in its emotional gestures, if not its biographical facts. And the second book I sort of think is, and I've realised it, I think it's a sort of an homage to the books that made me fall in love with writing. They're sort of those big realist novels, you know, the Middlemarches, those sort of Russian books like, you know, Anna Karenina, and I think it is sort of in a way a tribute to the things that made me fall in love with reading, you know, absorbing novel, you know, big sort of you know, things that chew off quite a big thing and mull it over. So I kind of think the first two books are sort of about my past. I'm sort of hoping I'll move on now, and my third book will sort of take, you know, look more at the future and the kind of writer I want to be and how I think about writing and the novel as a form more.
Because you are very experimental in terms of the novel as a form. Certainly your first novel experiments with voice and structure, and so does the second. Yeah,
I think in a more sort of subtle way. In some senses, the second book's quite sort of classic in feel, I'd say, as because it is, in a way, I think, a tribute to those big books that I loved at quite a formative time in my reading career. But you're right, the first book does look at form and is preoccupied with form and past and present and voice and structure. And this book does it does have structural elements, so we go back with these heavy sort of chapters deep into the characters' history, and do that 3 times, and then we come back with a sort of a renewed appreciation of, when you re-acknowledge, if not appreciation, of who they are and how they've got to be, and there's a definite sort of beginning, past, forward narrative engines thing going on there.
But they're almost like little novellas. They are fairly substantial in and of themselves.
Yeah, they are. And I wanted them to be like that, and I sort of didn't want to chop them up. I thought they were necessary to sort of give a sort of a completeness or a sort of depth to the book and the characters, because I'm asking the reader to sort of stay with these 4 characters for 500 pages. But going forward with my next book, I do want to be more overtly, I suppose, concerned with form, and I'm reading quite a lot of sort of books with more of a surreal edge, so like Blindness by Jose Saramago, and also some sci-fi. I'm reading Ursula Le Guin, kind of some of her stuff like The Lady of Heaven, so I'm not sure if like the sci-fi novel of Sheffield or Leeds has been written yet. I don't know. But I think
there's a space to occupy there.
I think that could be new untrammeled ground.
If you want to pitch that to Picador, that's absolutely fine. In terms of the actual, and you touched on it briefly there, the content of your second novel, I mean, obviously the first one was incredibly brave, tackling terrorism at that particular point in time. 2015 could be understood as the year of the Runaways. It's a year that's been characterised by the movement of people, either through voluntary circumstances or involuntary and forced, and the resultant politics and social and economic upheaval that's caused. How much has that context helped the novel, and how much has that actually worked maybe to hinder the project?
Yeah, I can see where it does get called, topical or timely, and I suppose it is this, the idea of refugees and migrants is sort of on people's minds at the moment, given Syria, given everything, and perhaps that makes people think this novel will in some way explain that. They'd be quite wrong, I think, to think that, but I think it does hinder, because I'm not sure I do see it as, if it is topical, then it's been sort of topical since time began.
Exactly.
It's been, migration's been, the story of the world, and people wanted to move elsewhere for a better life. And also, I'm not sure we can sort of equate what's, Syrian refugees with Indian economic migrants, Indian refugees. Sort of the thing about a novel, and it was also with Ours Are the Streets, where some people, perhaps looked at it, try to explain the Muslim suicide bomber, and it's not, it's an individual at a certain point in time and place in history and his life, and I think there's probably as many reasons why someone will go down that path as we could think of. So and the same with this one, I don't think it, one of the big things about the book is to show that it's, these people, these Indian migrants, or they're not just one homogenous brown mass. There's real, individual histories, there's complex backstories, there's hierarchies for when they come here, so there can be 12 to 15 young men in a house, but there's hierarchies based on what kind of visa they've got, if they've got a visa at all, what their economic circumstances were back home, what their caste is. Caste is a big thing that gets carried over from India, and it's just to show that there's layers here and there's differences, and it'd be wrong to see them all through one single lens.
It can be quite a reductive, I think, reading of the novel, certainly in terms of criticism. And actually, for all that the narrative focuses on the three men in the house, actually it's Narinda, the female protagonist, who is actually quite a driving force behind the novel. And I just wondered about the dynamics of having three male protagonists and a female, and what you needed to do in creating Narinda as this so-called visa wife in the dynamic of the novel.
Narinda's great. She's almost just like the moral heart of the book in many ways. She carries ideas of goodness and sacrifice and charity around with her, and it's interesting how the three men sort of can't afford to be good or to be kind or charitable in that way. But I wanted Narinda there to sort of just to hold those feelings. There's almost just like a glass bowl throughout the book, and then the glass bowl sort of shatters but doesn't quite as we get to the end. But so we have these three men at the beginning, and we see their stories, and Narinda's almost just kept as, she's quite mysterious, I think, in the first half of the book, and there's wondering, there's the reader might wonder what's she doing there, who is she, why is she in the story, but hopefully by the time we learn her story things start to click into place, and then hers is the last of the sort of there's three novellas in the book, and once you get her story and you realise her motivations and her reasons, then I think the book, sort of the narrative engine, the gears all click, and the book sort of starts moving forward with its own sort of power, I think. But yeah, I think she holds, she's almost at the centre of the book, and the three men sort of swirling around her, but she's almost quite closed in a way, and slowly her relationship, she's quite a devout character, and sort of the only meaningful relationship she's ever had in her life, her relationship with God, just is slowly tested throughout the novel, until by the end it sort of it all just falls for her. And I love her a lot.
She's amazing as a character, and she is the core which they orbit around. But Narinda, like the other male characters, that maybe the beauty in the representation is that it shows that even good people have to do bad things sometimes. Yeah,
and that's a question. It's a real question, I think. Like, what does it mean to be good today? Perhaps particularly for someone like Narinda, or someone like me, who's you're a British. I'm a British Asian. I'm born and brought up here. I've got cousins in India who are living really difficult lives, and what do I owe? Is it's just a quirk of birth that I'm able to enjoy the privilege. I would not be a novelist if my grandparents and parents hadn't done the migrations in the 60s that they had. And is it fair that I'm here and they're still sort of working their guts out back there? What do I owe them? Do I owe them anything? It's actually quite a vexed question every time I go back to India, and I see what's happening. It's always a sort of I'm always left quite ambivalent and quite conflicted. It's a real question, I think.
And a question about identity and belonging,
which is throughout both my novels, actually. So, what does it mean to belong to a land, and what if you don't belong to a land? What does that do to a person? What are the credits and debits of that situation? And I think it's something I've sort of just I'm okay with now, the fact that I don't need to sort of have a definitive sense of home, or this is my this is my sort of land. I think if I have any sense of home, it is just absolutely at my laptop when I'm writing. I think that's when I feel most content, and I feel that strongest sense of belonging, that this feels home. This feels like home.
So how comfortable are you as a writer then to be kind of put in this category of what we might call transnational, cosmopolitan, global world literature? Is this as much a novel about the world as it is about Sheffield or about the UK?
Yeah, I think it probably is a novel about sort of, there was a phrase that was spoken of in one review, like the desperation of, the globalisation of desperation. And I can see I could see that, and I thought that picked up on some key elements about what I hope for the book. But I am deeply drawn to writers who write about place and who stick to a particular place, whether it's, you know, Alice Munro in Huron County, or you know, Faulkner in you know, in this Jackson Town. So there is something about being sort of concentrating your writing around a place and trying to look deeper every time you go back to that place, and the more you look, the more you find that I find deeply attractive. And perhaps there is something like that for me and Sheffield, but it's complicated. But it's complicated by, you know, the fact that you know, my parents were immigrants to that city, which does keep, you know, make things a little more difficult, I think. You know, so, you know, I grew up in Sheffield, I grew up in Chesterfield, just south of Sheffield, during the late 80s, early 90s. Politically, it was a difficult time, and so that's the manufacturing industry was on its knees, the mines were being shut, and there's just a sense of betrayal hanging around the air, and so it wasn't the easiest place, I'd say, to grow up, and that does sort of linger with you, and, you know, your sense of home, my sense of home, and my sense of where to call home. But coupled with that, there's also a deep love for Sheffield as well. About that, it is, you know, if I have a home anywhere, it is that city, and it is something wanting to sort of give Sheffield, paid my due to Sheffield as well. So it's a complicated relationship. So it may well be, in some sense, be a global novel, but I don't see myself as a global writer. I see myself as actually a writer preoccupied by or interested in place, in the way that, you know, some of the writers I really admire are.
And so will you stick with the North in future work?
I think, well, it might be sort of a transfigured North in some way. There might be some sort of fantastical elements coming in, but I think my books will always have one foot in, say, you know, the subcontinent, and one foot in the north of England. I think that's probably who I am. So it feels right that my novels will reflect that.
Brilliant. Right, we're going to be lucky enough to hear a reading, I believe, from Year of the Runaways. This is from the very beginning, quite a novel.
Yeah, it's from early on. It's in chapter 1, and so I think, as we said, there's 4 characters in the book. In this scene, we see 2 of those characters. There's Randeep, who's he's 19 years old. He's recently over from India, and he's feeling, you know, quite homesick, quite lonely. There's quite a sense of aloneness, both with himself and in the world around him. And he's bringing his clothes over, you know, like a suitcase of clothes, to leave at the flat of his quite secretive, she's called visa wife, Narinda, who's also new to Sheffield. She's from Croydon, and I think that's all the context I need to give. So Narinda's just shown Randeep into her flat. She hadn't changed anything much. It was all very plain. The single plain brown leather settee, a plain tablecloth. The bulb was still without its shade. Only the blackout curtains looked new. Excuse me. Randeep set his case by the settee. How have you been? I'm getting used to it. Her hands were clasped loosely over her long black cardigan. You're getting to know your way around? Yes, thank you. Well, at least the weather is getting a smidgen better now. I thought the snow would never stop. She gave a tiny smile, but said nothing. Randeep wondered if she just wanted him to hurry up and leave again. He knelt before his case and thumbed the silver dials until the thing snapped open. Well, you know, as I said on the phone, I brought some clothes and things for you to keep here. He draped a pair of matching shirts across the creased rump of the settee, along with some black trousers and starched blue jeans, all still on their bent wire hangers. He took a white carrier bag, tied in a knot at the top, and left this on the table. Yeah, so we've got shaving cream, aftershave, you know, that kind of thing. Oh, and also some underwear, he added, in the casual manner he'd practiced on the way down. He reached back into his suitcase and handed her a slim red felt album. And these are photographs I think you should hang up. He watched her palming through the pages. The first few were taken on their wedding day, in a temple outside his city of Chandigarh. The later ones showed them enjoying themselves, laughing in a Florentine garden, choosing gifts at a market. They look believable to me, she said. Yeah, the lawyer, he sorted it all out. He said sometimes he asked to see where we went on holiday. He sidestepped saying honeymoon. There are dates, on the back, but are there stamps on our passports? Yeah, it's all taken care of. I only hope we've got enough. I'm hearing rumours of raids. There was a sort of frozen alarm in her face, which thawed to incomprehension. You think this place will be raided? But by who? Oh, it's just people at work talking. And there's always rumours. But I guess it is better to be prepared. Maybe I should, come and live here, he said, testing the water a little. The shock of the suggestion seemed to force her mouth to open. I wasn't being serious, but it's too small, she said. And the weather, she added, randomly. I understand completely, he said, layering smiles over his disappointment. He couldn't remember the last time he'd been so warm in a house, with food smelling as good as that on the cooker. She made to walk him to the door. No, I'll help you with this first. It's not fair to leave you to pack it all away. Delay tactics. She said she'd do it later, that it wasn't a problem. Reluctantly, Randeep followed her down the stairs. As she opened the door, he took the money out of his pocket and handed it to her. Another month, she said. The year will be over before we know it. Yes, he replied, shaking his head, as if amazed how quickly the time was passing, when really it seemed to him that each new week took on the span of an entire age. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. We have 10 minutes for audience questions, so if you'd like to raise your hand, and obviously speak clearly so the mics can pick you up. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just interested in what you were saying about you being very analytical as a reader when you first started out. Just wondering what aspects, as you were kind of new to the novel at 18, in what sense were you analytical? Was it plot? Was it character development? Or kind of sentence level? What is it? And still now, what is it that you look at, and what do you engage with in that sense?
Yeah, it's the authorial decision, so structure mainly. Structure really fascinates me about why a writer chooses to tell a story in one way and not the other. If I read a book in sort of the first person, I was wondering why, what's added by telling it in that way? Why not third? Why not, something else? So it's usually structure and form and sort of the frame that the writers use to tell the story that most preoccupies and it still does. I find, and because anyone who reads a lot, I suppose, you find that the innocence sort of goes. The inability to sort of read, in a sort of a golden way, sort of goes. And I think my reading's always quite grubby at the moment. I'm always thinking, why, what's wrong, why not? Why do you do that? Or you should have done this. That sort of thing happens a lot. And occasionally a book comes along, and you can sort of lose yourself, but. I do just like looking at how a book is put together and sort of the cogs of it. So, and mostly I'd say structure, especially like with books like, Mohsin Hamid's The Reluctant Fundamentalist. Is just great to read that book. I mean, it's wonderful. You absolutely can lose yourself in it, but also just the structural decisions he makes. I just really liked just pulling them apart and seeing what would happen if this happened. Yeah, these are just questions I sort of have turning over in my mind as I'm reading. So I'd say structure.
Yeah.
Sunjeev, I've just finished reading Runaways and I really enjoyed it, and I think I'd just like to make a comment really that it elicited great compassion in me, and with everything that's going on at the moment with the refugee crisis and all the rest of it. I know it's not the same situation, but it did make me think differently not differently perhaps, but think more and feel greater sort of sadness and compassion towards people going through all of this just by reading the stories of those four characters. And my family are also immigrants from the 60s. My parents came over from India, from Calcutta and Bombay. And so, although their stories aren't in that vein, the story of the immigrant I can really relate to. And my dad lives in India at the moment, and so I go backwards and forwards. And there's a lot of sort of themes that come out, and there's still the desperation for people to come. They see here as the sort of the golden land and opportunity, and it's still there. So I think it's a really, really interesting novel, and one which I can really, really relate to. So thank you.
Thanks.
It's a really challenging thing about the novel, though, not that in creating that empathy, it also creates tragedy, because the dream for life is things that are as hard here for a lot of these characters as they were, if not harder than they were at home.
Yeah, and a lot of people that are doing the that are exploiting these young men are people sort of from their own community who are established immigrants who don't, of course, see themselves as being exploited here. They see themselves as it's almost a rite of passage. They say, well, we did this, and it's just something you have to go through before you can become sort of a settled pillar of the community.
It's that horror of the familiar, though, because if you've ever been to a takeaway in Ecclesall Road, and this actually makes you think about the lair behind the counter.
Yeah, who are these people, and how they do, and just negotiating sort of, as you say, the horror of the familiar, but also what's familiar to us just becomes deeply unfamiliar to them. Just negotiating an escalator or confusing a lollipop lady with the police and those kinds of things, which. It's interesting to see the world through their eyes, and also which is also why I kept a lot of Punjabi in the book. Just that sense of, firstly, just because it is quite an insider's sort of story. These young men, they don't really have much to do with anyone who they don't feel they can immediately trust. So the people they tend to stick to are people like them or people from the sort of the British Asian community. And also just because I thought if I kept the Punjabi in there, if readers felt sort of lost by that or a sense of disorientation with that, then I thought that puts the reader in an interesting position of almost the migrant. Yeah. So I thought that was also the reason. But hopefully, these are sort of the structural things that hopefully create that or feed into the larger themes of the novel. Yeah,
it creates a really interesting power dynamic, and it's interesting with the Rushdie element, the incident on the escalator. Won't spoil it, but it really reminded me of East West, where the woman Sari gets stuck in the escalator, Rushdie's book. Yeah. And I wondered, just the kind of throwaway, you said that Rushdie, obviously one of the first novels you read, and now he's giving you puff quotes on your novel.
Yeah,
how does that feel?
That was great. There's something, just so lovely, sort of
really
full circle about it.
Definitely.
Yeah, that was wonderful. Yeah, I met him for the first time at a festival in Cheltenham. And it was wonderful. I just sort of opened the door to the sort of the green room, and he was there. I wasn't expecting to. Didn't know he was in there, and I was like, that was wonderful. He was very, very, very wonderful.
It's always comforting when your idols are good.
Yeah.
We'll time for one more question.
Just a general question about the role of the writer. In most lines of work, it would be quite unusual for someone to be responsible for the ideas, the research, the planning, the execution, maybe even sales. How do you find, now having gone through that a few times, are there certain bits you really relish, there's certain bits you either sort of wish you could almost get rid of and give to someone else, or does it all come quite naturally?
No, it certainly doesn't all come naturally. My favourite bits are sort of the stage I'm in right now, where I'm thinking about the next book and there's ideas, there's things there, but it could still be absolutely, anything. In theory, I could, the book could be set 3,000 years in the future on some random planet, or anything. Even though it might always boil down to a few brown people in Sheffield, in theory, it could go anywhere. So I love the freedom of that, and I also love when I've got a draft down and it becomes more collaborative, and editors and agents start becoming involved and getting there, and then suddenly the book starts to come alive, and in a way that it doesn't when I'm writing that initial draft. That initial draft is probably my worst. Yeah, the actual writing of the book I don't enjoy. It's just slightly because I do feel very much like the puppet master, so it doesn't feel sort of alive for me in any real sense. I hope yeah. Perhaps strangely, this book feels more alive to me now than it did while I was writing it. I think that distance makes those puppet strings sort of vanish in a way. But I'd say, yeah, the bit I don't relish is the actual writing, because I know that perfect idea is just it's going to be ruined by the time it's on the page. It's never, and the whole part of it. Iris Murdoch said this thing that she says she writes each new book to apologise for the one that came before, and I think I get that, because it's just trying to minimise the distance between what's in there and what's on the page with each book. So hopefully by my 15th novel there might just be that much, I might be that close to actually getting it right. So I don't enjoy the actual writing, even though it is completely absorbing and the hours fly by. It's also just quite difficult, and I wasn't very good. I'm saying particularly good now at the sort of the promotional aspects of being a writer. So being on stage, festivals. I love meeting readers, individually and stuff. But talking to large audiences, that doesn't, and still doesn't, as you can tell, come naturally to me at all. But I think it's because I've had to do quite a lot of it the last couple of years, and I'm getting better at it, and I'm enjoying it more and more. And so that's been the best thing, just getting better at that side of things.
Has teaching creative writing helped any of this?
I've only taught I've taught 2 workshops and 1 weekend course, and I think what I found about teaching was that it just makes me question my own decisions, and makes me actually get under the DNA
Right.
of my own reasons for doing what I do, which I really like. And then because I certainly want to understand why I make decisions, that I can talk to students and other writers about their decisions as well. So that's been really great. And actually I realised I really enjoy, because I said I really like editing part of it, and I really like editing other people's work and getting into the nitty-gritty of their word choices and their sentences, and working with students on that aspect of their work. I really, really enjoy it, and just making them question why they make certain decisions as well.
So this is where your love of structure comes in again, and
I think
form.
so. Yeah.
Brilliant.
So.
Well, we've really taken up enough of Sunjeev's time. I know he's got to get back to Sheffield, but could you please join me in thanking him?
Thank you.